The chandeliers above the Fort Bragg Officers Club glimmered like captured sunlight as the band played the last bar of the anthem. Every table gleamed with polished silver. I stood in my dress uniform heels, planted, spine straight, eyes forward. My father's voice carried across the hall, proud and heavy. Tonight, we honor two Whitlocks. Captain Ryan Whitlock for outstanding leadership in supply chain innovation, and Major Dana Whitlock, whose service continues to uphold this family's legacy. I heard my name, but not the warmth behind it. I knew the script. It was always his voice telling our story, never mine. When the applause faded, he lifted his glass again. And as tradition demands, Major Whitlock will continue to serve her brother's command. Family leads family. The air froze. Forks hovered. I felt 200 eyes searching my face, waiting for the obedient smile. I forced one, the kind that hides humiliation. My throat burned behind it. My brother's grin stretched wider. "Thank you, sir," Ryan said smoothly. "It's an honor to guide her next phase." He reached for my shoulder, casual, possessive. A gesture meant for the crowd, not me. I didn't flinch. In the Army, stillness is armor. The photographer's flash popped. Somewhere near the back, a woman whispered, "Did she just get demoted?" The words pierced sharper than rank pins. My father's speech rolled on about unity and discipline. He said we were proof that loyalty begins at home. The applause came again, polite. Practiced the kind that sounds like rain on tin. I stared at the flag behind him. It didn't move. Inside my chest, something cracked so softly no one could hear. Years of control disguised as guidance love, measured in obedience. I had built a career of precision and silence, only to be displayed like a family medal. Across the room, my mother Elaine sat poised in a pearl suit, hands folded in silent satisfaction. She caught my gaze and nodded slightly as if reminding me to play my part. For her appearances were currency. Shame was affordable only in private. My brother leaned toward the mic. "We all know Dana's diligence keeps this base running," he said, "and from now on she'll do it under my direction." Laughter rippled through the audience, the kind that hides discomfort under manners. My hand tightened around my glass until my knuckles whitened. I wanted to say something, anything, but my training screamed no. The room expected composure. The toast ended. Music resumed. People rose to mingle to congratulate. My father clasped hands with colonels, his shoulders wide with pride. "She understands respect," he said to one of them. "She's a soldier first." That word respect echoed like a command. I excused myself from the table and walked toward the balcony doors. The night air hit like release. Outside, Fort Bragg's parade field stretched quiet under floodlights. My reflection stared back from the glass ribbons-aligned eyes hollow. For a moment, I imagined peeling off the uniform, stepping into the dark, disappearing from the weight of their expectations. Behind me, the door opened. Ryan stepped out, 2 drinks in hand. "Don't take it personally, sis. Dad just wants optics." I didn't turn. "Optics?" I asked. He turned my rank into a photo opportunity. Ryan chuckled, voice low. "You outrank me on paper, but that makes people uncomfortable. Dad's fixing that." The casual cruelty landed harder than any reprimand. I turned to face him, my voice calm. "You think leadership is inheritance?" His smirk faltered. "It's politics, Dana. You know that." He set one glass beside me and walked back inside, leaving the door open, noise spilling through. I stood there until my pulse steadied. When I re-entered the hall, applause erupted again for another speech. My father had taken the microphone once more. To family, he said, to legacy, and to knowing one's place. The crowd echoed the toast. My mother's smile widened. My brother raised his glass high. I raised mine too, the crystal trembling slightly. For a second, I thought it might shatter in my hand. The band struck up a march. My father approached, still glowing from attention. "You did well," he said quietly. "Pride looks better than protest." I forced a neutral nod. "Yes, sir." He patted my arm, already turning toward his next conversation. His cufflinks caught the light, each one engraved with our family crest. They gleamed like small cages. I left before dessert. The corridor outside smelled of brass polish and flowers. My heels clicked a measured rhythm, the only sound in the empty hall. At the end of the corridor, I paused under the portrait of General Whitlock, my grandfather, who'd built the myth we were trapped inside. His eyes seemed to follow me stern and expectant. I whispered, "Legacy shouldn't feel like chains." The silence answered. Outside, the night had cooled. The flag above the club stirred slightly enough to break its stillness. My phone buzzed with messages, congratulations, admiration, gossip disguised as praise. I turned it off. Somewhere behind me, laughter burst again through the club doors. I walked across the parade ground, the sound of my steps fading into open air. Each one carried a question I'd never dared ask. When does loyalty become surrender? The stars over Fort Bragg blinked sharp and cold like the polished metals on my chest. I reached up, touched one, and felt its edge. Inside that hall, applause still echoed thin and hollow, the sound of everyone pretending nothing had just been taken from me. But I knew better. That night wasn't a toast. It was a warning. And though no one saw it, something inside me shifted small but irreversible. Respect had drawn blood, and I hadn't even seen the wound yet. The night after the ceremony lingered in my mind like static. Even back in my quarters, I could still hear it, the applause, the laughter that sliced through my uniform like invisible glass. It wasn't the volume that haunted me. It was the tone. Those polite claps weren't celebration. They were confirmation. Confirmation that everyone had seen me lose power and chosen to stay seated. I poured a glass of water and watched my reflection tremble in it. Every motion in the officers' club replayed behind my eyes my father's triumphant smile, Ryan's smirk, the guests' murmuring approval. They called it family unity. I called it spectacle. The next morning, the base cafeteria hummed with gossip disguised as small talk. Conversations stopped when I entered. Forks scraped plates in awkward rhythm. A junior officer looked up from his tray, hesitated, then said, "Congratulations, Major. Heard about the reassignment." The word reassignment burned. "Thank you," I replied evenly. "It's an honor to serve." He nodded too quickly, pretending relief that I'd said the right thing. Across the room, Ryan was laughing with two captains, his tone theatrical. "Come on, she's my sister," he said loudly enough for me to hear. "We keep it all in the family." Laughter followed tight, uncertain, but enough to make my pulse drum against my collar. Later that afternoon, during the logistics review, I stood beside him at the head of the table. The screen behind us flickered with supply projections. He leaned toward the mic voice, smooth. "Major Whitlock will assist in reviewing the shipment delays from Bravo Sector. She knows the system better than anyone." His tone suggested I was his assistant. I met his eyes, steady, unblinking. "Correction, Captain," I said quietly. "I oversee the sector. You'll receive my findings when the review is complete." The room fell silent. Papers stopped rustling. Ryan's jaw flexed. "Of course," he said, the smile returning like a mask. When the meeting adjourned, no one met my gaze. The air carried that strange military mix of respect and fear, the kind that smells like metal. In the hallway, I heard footsteps. "Ma'am, Sergeant Morales," said, catching up. He was one of the few who'd served under me in Kabul, loyal and blunt. "You handled that well. They didn't see it coming." I nodded. "They never do when you stay calm." He hesitated. Permission to speak freely, I glanced around. "Granted." He lowered his voice. "Be careful. There's talk. They're planning something with the inspection next quarter. Keep your reports clean." His warning landed like a coded message. I gave a short nod. "Understood." That evening, my mother called. Her tone was velvet wrapped around steel. "Your father says you left the celebration early." People noticed. I leaned against the counter. "I had duties in the morning." "You always have duties," she said. It wouldn't hurt to smile. "You know how much your father values unity." "Unity," I repeated. "Is that what we call humiliation now?" "Silence on the line, then." Her sigh, soft, disappointed. "Dana, you've always been too sensitive. Your brother's position reflects on all of us. If you support him, you support the family." Her words tightened around my chest. "What if the family doesn't support me?" I asked. Her voice cooled. "You don't need their support. You have responsibility." Then the click of disconnection. I stared at the phone for a long time. The hum of the bass outside filled the silence. Trucks moved under floodlights' engines growling like distant thunder. Responsibility. The word tasted metallic. That weekend during inspection prep, a new intern entered my office, a young lieutenant with bright eyes and careful posture. "Ma'am," she said, placing a folder on my desk. "Captain Whitlock asked for these signatures. He said you'd review and sign before noon." I opened the folder. 3 supply forms, all routine, except the authorization lines had my name typed in but already initialed in Ryan's handwriting. My pulse slowed. I closed the folder. "Thank you, Lieutenant." Dismissed. When she left, I opened the top drawer, pulled out my black notebook, and wrote down the time date and document numbers. The first note in what would become evidence. That night, the Officers Club hosted another dinner, smaller, more casual. I didn't plan to attend, but protocol demanded it. When I arrived, the same chandeliers glowed overhead, the same laughter coated the air. Ryan was already there, surrounded by officers and their spouses. My father stood near the bar, shaking hands with a visiting general. My mother waved from across the room, her smile rehearsed. I could feel the weight of every look, the subtle curiosity, the hidden pity. When the toast came again, I stayed seated. Ryan clinked his glass, grinning. "To teamwork," he said, "and to knowing when to follow the right lead." Applause erupted sharp and hollow. Each clap hit like a knife point, rhythmically slicing through the pretense. My skin prickled under the uniform. I smiled faintly, not for them, but for myself. They thought obedience meant defeat. They didn't notice that while they applauded, I was counting faces, memorizing names, observing who laughed first and who didn't at all. When the music swelled, I excused myself to the corridor. Through the glass doors, the field stretched wide and dark, the flag moving faintly under the floodlight. My reflection looked steadier now. The humiliation had cooled into clarity. They thought they'd silenced me with ceremony. They hadn't realized silence was my training ground. I reached into my jacket pocket and touched the edge of my black notebook, the paper crisp, the ink ready. "Let them clap," I whispered. "I'm listening." Behind the doors, laughter rose again, loud, confident, and fleeting. They didn't hear how sharp it sounded from where I stood. They didn't know applause could cut. The morning after the dinner began like any other roll call reports, the hum of engines starting in the motor pool. But something inside me had shifted. I moved through the base with the same measured stride, every crease in my uniform sharp enough to draw blood, every button fastened like armor. The officers who passed me gave polite nods, the kind reserved for someone both respected and pitied. I nodded back, wordless. Silence had become my strategy. Words were ammunition, and I wasn't ready to fire yet. By midday, the North Carolina sun beat down on the tarmac, heat shimmering above the vehicles. Ryan called for a logistics briefing. I stood by the map board while he spoke, hands behind my back, posture rigid. His tone carried that easy arrogance he'd inherited from our father. "We'll adjust the convoy route," he said. "Major Whitlock will oversee the reallocation." I gave a clipped, "Yes, sir," the words tasting bitter but controlled. The younger officers exchanged glances. They'd seen the rank on my shoulders, but they also saw the dynamic, the invisible leash of family authority. It made them uncomfortable. It was supposed to. After the meeting, I found my mother waiting in the lounge near the visitor's office, a place lined with framed photographs of decorated veterans. She looked perfectly composed, her hair-pinned pearls, gleaming eyes cool as glass. "You look tired," she said before I could speak. "I've been working." "So serious," she mused. "No one wants to follow a woman who never smiles, Dana." I exhaled slowly. "I'm not here to be followed. I'm here to lead." She smiled faintly. "Leadership isn't about proving you're right. It's about making people feel safe, even when that means pretending." I studied her, wondering how long she'd lived by that rule. "Pretending got us here," I said. "Pretending keeps this family together," she replied, lowering her voice. "Your father worked decades to build a name. You think one awkward toast will break that?" I stared at her pearls, perfect little circles, identical and confined. It wasn't awkward, Mother. It was deliberate. She sighed, tilting her head. "You always think everything is an attack. That's why people struggle to love you. Ryan knows how to play the game." He lies, I said evenly. He manipulates. Her gaze hardened. He wins. The words landed heavier than any reprimand. My throat tightened, but I kept my face still. She reached out, brushed invisible dust from my shoulder, a gesture that looked maternal to anyone watching. You can either fight the current or learn to swim in it, she whispered. You'll drown otherwise. Maybe drowning is better than living underwater, I said softly. Her hand froze midair, then withdrew. You sound like your grandfather, she said, turning away. He thought principles were more important than peace. It killed him. It gave him honor, I corrected. She didn't answer. The silence stretched until I saluted slightly, a courtesy not affection, and walked away. Outside, the air smelled of fuel and pine. The wind caught the edge of my cap, tugging gently like it wanted to free me. I walked across the parade field, the same place where I'd stood as a cadet when everything still felt simple duty country integrity. Now each word felt heavier, warped by politics and bloodlines. I reached the far end of the field and stopped near the memorial wall. Names etched in bronze reflected the late light. I traced one with my finger. Captain Mills, 2012. He'd once told me silence is a weapon. Learn when to use it. I finally understood. That evening my father called. His tone was brisk, efficient. Your mother says you're upset. I'm fine, sir. Good. Because we can't afford drama right now. The colonel from Division Command will be visiting next week. I need you to act like the team's united. Are we? I asked. We will be, he said sharply. Ryan's doing well. Don't overshadow him. He's my subordinate, I reminded. Not at this dinner, he replied. The line went dead. I stood in the quiet room, the phone still against my ear, pulse steady. My reflection in the window looked exactly like the daughter they'd raised, disciplined, composed, loyal. But behind the stillness, something else was forming. Stillness wasn't surrender. It was study. Every insult, every manipulation, every applause disguised as approval was a data point, and I was collecting all of them. Before bed, I opened my black notebook again. Under the date, I wrote a single line. They confuse silence with submission. Let them. Then I slid it under my pillow, turned off the light, and lay staring at the ceiling. The hum of the air conditioner filled the darkness, steady, unbroken. I could feel the anger inside me cooling into focus, each heartbeat sharpening it. They thought they'd taught me discipline. They didn't realize they'd trained me for war. When I was a child, the Whitlock name was already a uniform. My father wore it like a medal, my mother like a brooch, and Ryan like a crown. I wore it like a weight. Our house in Fayetteville sat near the old training grounds, a perfect 2-story replica of military discipline. The flag flew year-round, the lawn trimmed to regulation precision, and every morning at 6, my father's voice cut through the hallway like a bugle. Discipline is love, he'd say, as the coffee percolated. Order is safety. Those were his commandments, the Whitlock Doctrine. My mother repeated them like hymns. Your father sacrificed for this country, she'd whisper when he wasn't looking. We must look worthy of it. Ryan was born when I was 4, and from the beginning our roles were set. I was the responsible one, the shadow soldier. He was the prodigy, the heir. When father taught us to salute Ryan's crooked hand, earned a laugh, mine a correction. Don't aim for approval. Dana, father would say, his voice clipped. Aim for perfection. Mother would stand nearby, arms crossed, eyes scanning like she was evaluating a portrait. She's too rigid, she'd murmur. You can't teach charm. Sundays were inspection days. Father would pace the living room while Ryan and I stood at attention. Shoes polished, he'd bark. Yes, sir. Bed made to standard. Yes, sir. Attitude. That one always tripped me. Steady, sir. Ryan would grin and add, proud, sir. That was what earned him the pat on the shoulder. It wasn't precision that pleased my father, it was performance. When I turned 12, he started taking Ryan to the shooting range, but told me to help Mother with the guest list for his retirement dinner. You'll learn hosting, she said, straightening my collar. Men remember manners more than medals. I remember watching them drive away through the window, the flag on the mailbox fluttering in the same rhythm as my pulse. I told myself it didn't matter. Soldiers don't need applause. But I wasn't a soldier yet. I was just a daughter learning how to disappear quietly. In high school, I joined JROTC, father approved but with conditions. You'll represent this family, he said. Don't embarrass the name. When I won top cadet that spring, he nodded once. No smile. Expected, he said. That word meant everything and nothing. Mother, on the other hand, turned it into a show. My daughter is following in her father's footsteps, she told the neighbors, glossing over the hours I'd spent drilling in the rain. Ryan got his own moment that week, first place in the regional debate. He hated rules but loved audiences. That's the spirit, Father told him. A leader commands with presence. Then he looked at me. And a follower maintains order. I learned to nod instead of answering. At 17, I applied to West Point without telling them. The acceptance letter arrived on a humid July morning. I still remember the smell of cut grass and the sound of my mother's heels on the tile when she read it. You didn't ask permission, she said, voice calm but trembling underneath. It's an appointment, not a request, I replied. Father came home that evening, letter in hand. He didn't shout. He rarely needed to. Ambition without alignment is rebellion, he said. We don't do rebellion in this house. But he signed the consent form anyway. His signature pressed so hard, the pen tore through the paper. The first year away, I thought distance would make freedom easier. It didn't. I could still hear his voice in every order barked by a superior, every evaluation written in red ink. I excelled because failure meant proving him right. When Ryan visited during family weekend, he wore my old ROTC pin like a trophy. Guess it's my turn next, he said, winking. He didn't have to fight for approval. It was already stamped with his name. After graduation, when I received my commission, my parents stood beside me for the photo. Father's hand rested on my shoulder, his grip firm. You make us proud, he said for the camera, then added under his breath, Don't outshine your brother. That warning stayed with me longer than the medal did. Over the years, I watched the Whitlock Doctrine evolve. It was never written down, but I could recite it from memory. 1. Appear competent even when you're not. 2. Protect the family image at all costs. 3. Loyalty outranks truth. 4. Silence is strength. 5. Dissent is disrespect. Those rules built our house, fed our dinners, shaped every conversation. They turned Ryan into a reflection of my father and me, into his mirror, obedient, precise, empty. Now, decades later, as I stood in my quarters at Fort Bragg, those lessons replayed like old radio static. My father's voice still echoing. Order is safety. But I had learned something different in the field, something the doctrine never accounted for. Order without justice is control, and control without respect is tyranny. I looked down at the framed photo on my desk, our family lined up in perfect formation, smiles synchronized. I flipped it face down. The sound was small, but it felt like a detonation. That night, before turning off the light, I wrote in my notebook, "The doctrine built me." But it also taught me how to dismantle it. Afghanistan 2015. The air tasted like dust and metal, and the horizon was a mirage that never came closer. I was 25, a logistics officer fresh out of training, stationed with the 82nd Airborne at Bagram. Ryan was a new lieutenant posted to my unit through what Father called family coordination. In reality, it was favoritism disguised as mentorship. I kept my uniform pressed and my emotions flat. Out here, the Whitlock name meant nothing until it did. We'd been tracking a convoy delay for 3 days when command ordered a reroute through Wardak Province. The valley was unpredictable, but supplies were critical. I reviewed the plan twice, checking weather patterns and signal strength. Ryan insisted on leading the escort. "I need field experience," he said, grin reckless beneath his helmet. "You'll handle the paperwork anyway." His tone wasn't cruel, just confident in the immunity our last name provided. I wanted to stop him. Instead, I signed the report. That was my mistake. The convoy rolled out at dawn. I monitored from the operations tent headset tight against the noise of the generators. 30 minutes in radio static swallowed their voices. Then a sharp burst IED East Ridge Vehicle 2 disabled. My pulse froze. I could hear shouting, then nothing but wind. "Confirm casualties," I said into the mic. Silence. My stomach hollowed. Without waiting for clearance, I grabbed my kit and ran for the Jeep. The driver hesitated. Major Command said, "Wait." "Then court-martial me later," I said. The drive blurred into motion and heat. When we reached the valley, smoke coiled above twisted metal. The second Humvee was cratered debris scattered across the road. I could hear gunfire echoing from the ridge. Ryan's voice came through faintly on the local channel. "We're pinned. 2 down. Need extraction." His coordinates placed him 50 meters ahead behind a half-collapsed wall. I slid out, crawling through dust. The world narrowed to sound bullets snapping men yelling the whine of engines trying to start. I found him crouched beside a wounded private, blood soaking the man's sleeve. Ryan's face was pale, his weapon jammed. "Cover me," I said, grabbing the injured soldier's vest and dragging him back toward the truck. "Dana, don't!" A round hit the wall above us, spraying dust. "Move!" I shouted. We reached the vehicle just as another blast rippled the ground. My ears rang. When the smoke cleared, Ryan was on his knees, shaking eyes unfocused. I hauled him up and shoved him into the back seat. "Radio command," I ordered. "Tell them we need evac now." He fumbled with the mic. I took it, voice steady despite the ringing in my skull. "This is Major Whitlock Convoy, 2 secured requesting medevac grid 35 Alpha." When the choppers arrived, the valley was still smoking. We loaded the wounded first. I watched as the medics lifted Ryan onto the stretcher beside the soldier he'd been trying to help. His hand brushed mine briefly, his voice a whisper through the noise. "You saved me." I didn't answer. Saving him wasn't the hard part. Living with what followed would be. Back at base, I filed the after-action report. It was clinical exact, no embellishment, no omission. 2 injuries, 0 fatalities. Command commended the swift response. I thought it was over until the next morning when I saw the bulletin on the internal feed, Lieutenant Ryan Whitlock credited with decisive leadership during convoy attack. His photo, not mine, flashed under the headline. My chest tightened. I went straight to the colonel's office. "Sir, there's a mistake in the report." He looked up from his desk. "Not a mistake, Major. Optics. A lieutenant's heroism boosts morale better than a major's logistics correction. Don't take it personally. With respect, sir, accuracy matters. Accuracy doesn't win hearts," he said. That night, the base mess hall was buzzing. Soldiers slapped Ryan on the back, called him hero, bought him drinks. He played the part well, humble, charming, the perfect image of courage. When he spotted me at the doorway, he raised his glass. To my sister, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Couldn't have done it without her. The words were generous, but the spotlight was his. Laughter, applause, flash of cameras. It was the same pattern, just a new stage. Later, when the crowd thinned, he approached me outside near the generator hum. "I didn't ask for the credit," he said. "They just wrote it that way." I met his eyes. "But you didn't correct it." He hesitated. "Dad saw the report. He's proud. Maybe this makes up for—" He trailed off. I finished for him. For being the son who never followed orders. He smiled faintly. Maybe. Then, softer. Almost apologetic. "You'll get your turn." I watched him walk away, the desert wind lifting dust around his boots. My turn. The phrase lodged in my chest like shrapnel. Weeks later, Command issued commendations. Ryan received a medal. I got an efficiency ribbon. When Father called, his voice was bright. "Heard about the mission." Ryan handled it brilliantly. "You two make quite the team." I said nothing. "You sound tired," he added. "Try to be proud, Dana. Leadership is shared credit." After the call, I sat outside the tent, the sky streaked with red dust and fading light. I thought about the soldier whose life I'd dragged back from that valley. He'd been transferred out, his files sealed. He would never know whose hands pulled him through the smoke. I opened my notebook and wrote one line. "Some medals are made of silence." Then I closed it and looked toward the mountains. The sun was setting the horizon, bleeding gold into gray. Ryan's laughter drifted from the barracks behind me. I told myself it didn't matter who they clapped for. But the echo of that applause still found its way through the desert air, cutting sharp and clean, reminding me that even in war, the Whitlock doctrine followed me everywhere. The months after the convoy blurred into routine, but inside I was unraveling one quiet thread at a time. The desert air had a way of bleaching everything color memory, even anger. Outwardly, I was composed a model officer. Inside, the silence I had mastered was starting to feel like a cage. I told myself obedience kept things steady, that following orders protected lives. But obedience had also turned truth into a liability. And I was learning painfully that silence wasn't respect. It was surrender. Ryan's promotion came faster than anyone expected. The medal from Wardak had opened every door. Father wrote about it in the family Christmas letter, calling him a rising leader with natural command presence. My name appeared once in a list of acknowledgments his sister stationed nearby. When the letter reached the base, it circulated like a novelty. "Your old man sounds proud," one of the sergeants said. "He should be," I replied evenly, though my stomach turned. Ryan handled the attention easily. He'd learned charm was armor, not burden. I spent my nights reviewing manifests under the dim glow of a single desk lamp. Numbers were safer than people. They obeyed rules. They balanced if you treated them right. But the sound of applause from the recreation tent bled through the canvas. Ryan's laughter again, officers celebrating another successful transfer he hadn't planned. My pencil pressed hard enough to tear the page. I kept writing anyway. If they wanted me invisible, I would become a ghost that noticed everything. The first crack appeared when the supply routes misaligned. Someone had rerouted fuel shipments without authorization. On paper, the order bore my signature. I checked the logs. Ryan's credentials had been used. When I confronted him, he brushed it off. "It was a timing issue," he said, leaning in the doorway of my tent, casual, smiling. "You were busy." "I just expedited." "That's forgery," I said. "That's initiative," he countered. "Dad always said a leader makes decisions." I stared at him steady. "Dad also said respect the chain of command." "And you always followed him like gospel," he said quietly. "Maybe that's why no one hears you." He left before I could respond. The words echoed longer than the engine starting outside. No one hears you. It wasn't cruelty. It was fact. The next morning I sat in the mess tent with my coffee untouched, watching sunlight cut through the canvas in thin gold stripes. Around me, soldiers traded stories about home wives, kids' football scores. I envied their simplicity. For them, silence meant peace. For me, it had become a leash. I remembered the first time I'd learned to bite my tongue, age 9, standing in our kitchen while Father scolded me for questioning his orders. "Good soldiers don't talk back," he'd said. I'd nodded, swallowing the truth even then that good soldiers still bleed when you pretend everything's fine. That afternoon, I drafted a report noting the unauthorized rewrote. Before submitting it, I hesitated. Filing it meant escalating against my brother. Not filing it meant complicity. I sat there, pen in hand, the weight of family and uniform pressing equally hard. I signed the report and locked it in my desk. For the first time, the act of silence felt heavier than the paperwork itself. Weeks passed. Command reassigned me temporarily to logistics oversight near Jalalabad. Ryan stayed behind, and the distance felt like oxygen. The mountains there were brutal and quiet, unbroken by anything except the whir of helicopters. One evening, after a day of unloading supplies, I walked out beyond the perimeter where the horizon swallowed sound. I watched the sun sink behind the ridge, painting everything in bruised light. I thought about loyalty, how we're taught to confuse it with love, how we call endurance strength. But endurance without purpose was just obedience. And obedience without conviction was slavery dressed in medals. When I returned to base, the report was gone from my desk. The drawer had been relocked, but the folder inside was missing. Ryan's smirk at breakfast told me enough. "Lose something?" he asked, stirring his coffee. I didn't answer. "You're welcome," he said softly. "Dad reads everything you send. Consider that a favor." He rose and left, leaving the mug half full. I watched the steam fade until only the bitter smell remained. That was the moment I stopped being angry. Anger was fire. Fire burns out. What stayed was colder, a precise, cutting kind of clarity. That night, I opened my black notebook. My handwriting was steadier than I expected. Obedience keeps peace. Truth keeps integrity. Choose one. I underlined the last 2 words until the paper tore slightly. The generator outside coughed, lights flickered, and for a second the entire tent went dark. In that darkness, I realized what I'd been doing all my life, waiting for permission to speak, waiting for someone to see the injustice, waiting for change. But change doesn't ask permission. It demands it. The light snapped back on. I tore out the page and placed it beneath my medal from Wardak. That medal, like my silence, was polished but hollow. Tomorrow, I would begin copying every order, every signature, every lie. Not to expose him yet, but to remember what obedience had cost me. As I closed the notebook, the wind outside picked up, flapping the tent's edge like distant applause. I smiled faintly, the first real one in months. They thought my quiet meant loyalty. They'd never learned that silence could sharpen into strategy. The transfer orders arrived wrapped in bureaucratic politeness, stamped with command insignia and my father's influence. Reassignment Major Dana Whitlock, Deputy Logistics Officer Fort Bragg. I read it 3 times, each word sinking deeper like sand into a wound. Ryan's name followed mine in bold, Captain Ryan Whitlock, Commanding Officer. The paper smelled faintly of toner and inevitability. My first thought wasn't anger, it was exhaustion. I'd earned my autonomy one deployment at a time, only to be placed back under my brother's command. I called my father that night. "You requested this," I said, voice steady. "Of course," he replied as if it were obvious. "You two are an asset together. He needs your experience. You need his visibility." "Visibility," I repeated. "That's your word for control. Don't dramatize, Dana. Families work best when they stay aligned." The word aligned felt surgical cold, exact, irreversible. "You've spent years teaching me to lead," I said. "Now you're telling me to obey again. You're telling me you can't cooperate with your brother," he countered. I paused. "I'm telling you this isn't a partnership." He exhaled sharply. "You still take everything personally. That's your weakness." The line went quiet. "We're not discussing this further. Report by Monday." The call ended, leaving only the hum of the barracks light above me. Monday came too soon. Fort Bragg looked the same, but I wasn't. The base's long gray corridors still smelled of wax and history. The flags in perfect rows, the murals of valor lining the walls. As I walked through the logistics wing, salutes followed some genuine, others cautious. I was known here, respected even. But reputation meant little when your last name carried a shadow. Ryan's new office was spacious, overlooking the training field. He sat behind the desk that used to be mine years ago, tapping his pen like a drumbeat of entitlement. "Welcome back, Major," he said, grin practiced. "Family reunion, huh?" "You replaced me," I said simply. "Temporary restructuring," he replied. Command thought it best. Command or Dad. Same thing these days. His smile didn't fade. "Relax, Dana. You'll still run the details. I'll handle the optics." I stood in silence, scanning the office, the plaques I'd earned still on the wall, my old photograph from Kabul turned sideways as if even memories now belonged to him. "You've decorated well," I said. "Only the best," he replied. "We want visitors to feel confidence." "Confidence or control?" I asked. He leaned back. "Does it matter?" The first week felt like a test I hadn't studied for. Orders routed through. Ryan came back rewritten, phrased in his tone. Meetings ended with him summarizing my briefings as if the ideas were his. My staff shifted loyalties faster than I could track, adapting to the new hierarchy of charm over competence. I stayed silent, professional, outwardly composed. Inside, that silence grew teeth. One evening, while reviewing inventory reports, I noticed a discrepancy. Shipments double-counted under different codes. I took the file to Ryan's office. He was laughing with 2 visiting officers, the kind of laughter meant for performance. "Problem?" he asked when they left. I handed him the folder. "Double allocations from division. We'll overdraw next quarter." He skimmed it lazily. "Don't worry. Dad cleared that. Dad doesn't run the army," I said. "He just acts like he does. And people listen," he said, tone sharp. "That's leadership." "No," I said quietly. "That's manipulation." He rose from his chair, crossing the room until he stood close enough that I could smell the faint cologne Father used to wear. "You think anyone cares how things get done? The results speak. Until the lies catch up," I said. "They won't," he replied. "You'll keep them clean like always." I stepped back. "You don't have that authority." His voice lowered soft but dangerous. "Maybe not. But Dad does. That night I called my mother. She answered with her usual serenity. Your father says the transition's been rough. He engineered it, I replied. You're dramatizing again. Ryan's under pressure. Be his anchor. He's not drowning, I said. He's enjoying the water. You've always envied him, she said gently, as if diagnosing a fever. No, I said. I've outgrown him. Her silence stung more than argument. Then, she said softly, Dana, don't make enemies out of family. You'll regret it. I almost laughed. You can't make enemies out of people who never saw you as an equal. She sighed, and for a moment I thought I heard real sadness. You sound just like your father when he was young, she murmured. Too proud for peace. Maybe peace built on silence isn't peace at all. The line clicked dead. Days turned into weeks. My every move felt observed Ryan's assistants forwarding my memos, our father's calls arriving after every meeting. The chain of command had never been so literal. My uniform still bore my rank, but authority had turned invisible, dissolved by bloodlines and politics. At night, I walked the training field after lights out, the stars sharp over the empty parade ground. I thought about Afghanistan, the dust, the noise, the certainty of danger. You could hear a threat before it reached you. Here, it whispered through hallways and family phone calls. I stopped near the flagpole, the rope clinking softly in the wind. My reflection in the glass door looked composed, even strong, but I could feel the cracks underneath. I whispered to the night, they've mistaken my patience for permission. The wind carried no answer. It didn't need to. I already knew how this would go. Families like mine didn't collapse in explosions. They tightened slowly, link by link, until you couldn't tell where duty ended and the cage began. By the time October rolled in, my silence had learned how to see. I stopped arguing, stopped explaining, and started watching. Fort Bragg ran on rhythm orders at dawn, paperwork by noon, drills at dusk, and within that rhythm, deception hid easily. I began mapping it the way I used to map supply lines in the field track record Verify. The first rule of surviving command politics was the same as surviving combat: observe before you act. So, I observed. Every morning I arrived 15 minutes earlier than the staff and brewed coffee just to listen. You can tell more about loyalty from casual chatter than from written reports. The captains closest to Ryan spoke loud, confident, too eager to agree. The ones with conscience lowered their voices when I walked by. Morales was one of them. Careful, he said one morning as he passed my desk. Rumor says they're prepping another oversight audit. I nodded, pretending disinterest. Good, I said softly. Let them audit. I've started my own. I bought a separate notebook, smaller than the black one, easy to slip into my jacket. In it went dates times inconsistencies, the kind that look small until they line up like coordinates. Double-billed shipments, phantom signatures, fuel expenses that didn't match travel records, all signed or authorized by Ryan's division with my name copied beneath. He was building his legacy the way Father taught him with other people's work. But this time, I wasn't going to be the proof of his genius. I was going to be the evidence of his fraud. One afternoon during a joint review, I noticed Ryan's assistant, Lieutenant Porter, flustered printing documents too quickly. When she left, I walked past the machine and glanced at the tray. The top page was an unfinalized requisition marked urgent listing material shipments that hadn't been logged. I folded it carefully and slipped it under a manual in my arm. That night under my lamp, I compared it against the archived data. The shipment never existed. The numbers led nowhere except to a shell account. I wrote one line in the small notebook: he's transferring assets through dummy allocations. Beneath it, I added a second line. Silence is no longer protection, it's participation. The next week, Ryan called a staff meeting. His voice filled the conference room with easy confidence. We've got inspection season coming. The brass will be watching. He smiled at me. Luckily, my sister's the best at cleaning up paperwork. The laughter was polite but uneasy. I felt the eyes on me waiting for a reaction. I gave none. He mistook it for submission. We'll present unity, he continued. No discrepancies, no drama. Then keep your numbers straight, I said quietly. His grin faltered for half a second before he recovered. Always the perfectionist, he said. After the meeting, Morales caught up to me outside. You planning something, ma'am? I looked at him. Planning isn't the word. Preparing. He frowned. For what? For the truth to stop being optional. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Just be smart. They don't play fair. Neither do I said. Nights became my refuge. I'd sit by the narrow window of my quarters, the hum of generators in the distance, and sort through copies of files I'd quietly made. Each document was a piece of a pattern, and the pattern was tightening like a net. I discovered that Ryan had redirected funding from supply maintenance into a private contractor owned by one of Father's old associates. Every transaction left faint fingerprints, timestamps matching approval codes, hidden but traceable. I didn't know yet what my endgame was. I just knew that when the reckoning came, I wouldn't be caught unprepared again. My mother called one Sunday evening. You sound distracted, she said. Work, I answered. Always work. You used to be so lively. That was before I learned the cost of loyalty. Loyalty builds trust, she said. No, I replied. Trust builds loyalty. You've got it reversed. She sighed. Ryan says you've been cold with him lately. Cold keeps me focused. Dana. She warned families that keep score never win. Then why are we always competing? I asked. She didn't answer. Your father's worried, she added finally. He says you're making things difficult. I'm just keeping records, I said. You make that sound dangerous. For some people it will be. I hung up before she could turn that into another lesson on respect. Weeks passed and the act became easier. I nodded at meetings offered data never showed emotion. But inside I was cataloging everything, tone, timing, temperament. You can tell when corruption grows because it stops whispering. It starts assuming no one's listening. One night as I was locking up, Lieutenant Porter appeared in my doorway. She looked uneasy. Ma'am, she said quietly. You didn't hear this from me, but the upcoming inspection Captain Whitlock requested it personally. I blinked. What? He told command he's concerned about irregularities in your department. For a moment, I just stared. Then I smiled faintly. Good, I said. Let him dig. Porter looked confused. Ma'am, when you dig long enough, I said, closing my briefcase, you find what you buried. After she left, I turned off the light and stood in the dark office. The hallway outside was empty, the faint echo of boots fading into the distance. The air smelled of dust and ink and something colder anticipation. I looked at the stack of folders on my desk, each one marked with a date, each one waiting for its purpose. My father once told me silence was the highest form of discipline. But discipline without conscience was complicity. I wasn't going to be complicit anymore. I opened my notebook and wrote a new heading. Phase 1 observation complete. Beneath it, one final note. Next exposure. By November, the air at Fort Bragg carried that dry chill that made metal sting when you touched it, and hierarchy hung even heavier than the weather. Ryan had grown into his role with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. I had learned to speak less, listen more, and let arrogance expose itself in silence. The hardest part wasn't the work, it was the performance. Pretending his tone didn't bite. Pretending his orders didn't humiliate. Pretending the others weren't watching. It started small the way disrespect always does. A misplaced Dana instead of Major Whitlock in front of subordinates. A half smile when I offered corrections. A joke about who's really in charge here. I let them slide at first because calling them out would feed his narrative that I was too emotional to lead. But every act of restraint felt like swallowing glass. One morning during a readiness drill, Ryan walked into the briefing room 5 minutes late, coffee in hand. Major, he said brightly, handing me the cup. 2 sugars right. He placed it in front of me like a peace offering, except the room was full dozens of officers and NCOs seated around the long table. I stared at it, then at him. His grin widened. Come on, Dana. You always made the best coffee during field ops. Laughter rippled through the room, hesitant but real. I picked up the cup slowly, steady, then set it aside, untouched. We'll begin, I said flatly, clicking the projector remote. Captain Whitlock, please brief the convoy adjustments. The title hit him like a slap. He hesitated, then continued, voice tight. Yes, ma'am. After the meeting, Morales followed me out. You handled that well, he murmured. He wanted a reaction. He's going to get one eventually, I said quietly. Just not the one he expects. Later that afternoon, Ryan called me into his office. You embarrassed me in front of my staff, he said. You embarrassed yourself, I replied. You turned a briefing into a comedy sketch. His jaw tightened. You think you're better because you've got seniority? No, I said. Because I earned it. You've always had a problem with authority. No, I corrected. Just with incompetence. For a moment, the mask slipped. Watch yourself, he said softly. Dad's patience has limits. So does mine, I answered. The following days, the tension became public sport. Ryan would overrule my logistics schedules mid-meeting, citing command discretion. When I questioned the practicality, he'd smirk and say, Noted, Major. The others learned to avoid eye contact, afraid of choosing sides. Morales stayed loyal but cautious. They're baiting you, he warned. They want you to break decorum. Then I'll let them break themselves first. Friday came with another humiliation disguised as routine. We were preparing for an equipment audit when Ryan called across the hangar. Major Whitlock. His voice carried over the hum of machinery. Be a sport and grab the inspection clipboard for me. A few soldiers turned. He knew it. It's right next to you, I said evenly. Come on, Dana. He pushed, smiling. Don't be stubborn. I could feel every gaze on me, the younger recruits watching to see what I'd do. I walked to the table, picked up the clipboard, and handed it to him. Thank you, he said cheerfully, loud enough for everyone to hear. Teamwork makes the dream work. I stood there for one heartbeat longer than necessary, eyes locked on his. Then I said quietly but clearly, It's Major. Don't forget that again. His smile faltered. The soldiers around us froze. Morales coughed into his hand to hide his grin. Noted, Ryan muttered, turning back to the inventory logs. That night, he sent me an email marked Performance Evaluation Draft. It wasn't subtle. Phrases like difficulty with cooperation and inflexible under leadership transition peppered the document. I read it twice, then archived it without comment. Let him build his paper trail. I was building mine too. At dinner, the officers' club buzzed with weekend chatter. I sat alone at a side table reviewing my notes. Morales joined me, setting down a beer. You're letting him walk all over you, he said bluntly. For now, I replied. You planning to nuke him? No, I said. I'm planning to let him light the match himself. He leaned back, studying me. You know, most people would have snapped by now. Most people didn't grow up in the Whitlock house, I said. In my family, composure was the only weapon we were allowed to use. Across the room, Ryan laughed too loud with a group of visiting officers. His charm filled the space like perfume, pleasant artificial suffocating. One of them turned to glance my way, whispering something that made the table chuckle. I caught Ryan's glance toward me just long enough to see the satisfaction flicker behind his smile. He was winning, or so he thought. When I returned to my quarters, I opened my smaller notebook again. Under the heading, Phase 1 Observation Complete, I added new entries, public disrespect documented, command manipulation recorded, witnesses multiple. Then beneath it all, one final line, every humiliation is a receipt. I closed the notebook and placed it beside my medal from Wardak. Outside, the base quieted the night wind whispering through pine trees. Somewhere beyond the darkness, I could hear the faint echo of laughter from the officers' club, his laughter. I smiled to myself, not in defeat, but in calculation. Let him enjoy his applause, I thought. The louder it gets, the harder it falls silent. It was a Sunday afternoon in late November when they showed up. No call, no warning, just the sound of my mother's knock, polite but final, followed by my father's voice behind it. Dana, open up. I froze halfway through my coffee. I hadn't invited them to Fort Bragg. They didn't visit without a reason. The apartment I kept on base was small, clean lines, neutral walls, one framed photo of my unit, nothing personal enough to be weaponized. I'd designed it that way on purpose, but as soon as they stepped inside, the space shrank. My mother moved first, eyes sweeping the room like an inspector general. So minimalist, she said, touching the edge of the counter. Almost sterile. It's efficient, I replied. Clutter slows the mind. Or hides it, she murmured, smiling faintly. My father stood near the window, hands behind his back. gaze sweeping the parking lot below. Even in civilian clothes, he carried the stiffness of command. "We came because we're concerned," he said, tone-clipped, rehearsed. "Ryan says you've been difficult." I set the coffee mug down carefully. "Ryan says a lot of things." "And you say very little," my mother added. "That's not strength, Dana. That's avoidance." I almost laughed. "You raised me to believe silence was strength." "We raised you to respect hierarchy," she corrected, sitting on the couch without invitation. "And now you're undermining it. By doing my job, by challenging your brother publicly." My father turned voice low. "You embarrassed him in front of subordinates. You know how fragile command structure is." "Fragile because he's not fit to lead," I said. "You're forgetting yourself," he snapped. The word hit like a slap. "No," I said quietly. "I'm remembering myself." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. My mother broke it first. "You're letting resentment cloud your duty. My duty is to the uniform, not the family name." "That uniform exists because of your family name," my father said. "Connections matter, Dana. Reputation keeps doors open. For who I asked. Because the only doors I've seen open lately lead to your son's promotions." He exhaled sharply. "You always make everything about fairness. Life doesn't reward fairness. It rewards loyalty." My mother stood walking to the shelf where my medal from Wardak sat. She picked it up delicately, her reflection fractured in the gold. "You've done well, but people forget. Influence is what lasts. You can't build that by being difficult." She placed the medal back down carefully. "Ryan's learning to navigate politics. You could learn something from him." "I learned enough," I said, watching him take credit for what I earned. Her eyes flicked to mine, cool and disappointed. Still bitter, still honest. My father's tone hardened. "You're treading dangerous ground. The Army doesn't tolerate insubordination." "Neither do I." "Then maybe stop mistaking independence for defiance." He stepped closer, the old general's posture surfacing. "Do you know how many careers I've salvaged, how many reputations I've built?" "You should thank me. For what I asked. For building a cage sturdy enough to call it protection." The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. "You've changed," she said softly. "That's the point," I replied. They stayed another hour long enough to turn concern into interrogation. Questions disguised as advice. "You're isolating yourself. People are saying you're uncooperative. You've always been too rigid." Each word layered over the next like bricks. By the time they left, the room felt colder. My father paused at the door. "Dana," he said, "family unity is everything. Don't make me choose between you and him." I met his eyes. "You already did." After the door closed, I stood in the quiet, the smell of their expensive cologne still clinging to the air. I thought of how they'd always fed on silence, how peace in our family was measured by how quickly we swallowed discomfort. As children, Ryan learned to charm. I learned to disappear. It was survival, not harmony. I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. My handwriting was sharp controlled. Pattern confirmed manipulation disguised as concern. Psychological conditioning consistent since childhood. Then I added another line slower this time. They think silence is obedience. They've forgotten silence can listen too. That night, Morales texted me, heard the old man was on base. "Everything okay?" I typed back. "Everything's exactly as expected." Then I stared at the screen for a long time before adding, "Be ready soon." I turned off the lights and stood by the window, looking out at the dim glow of the base stretching toward the pine line. Somewhere out there, Ryan was probably having dinner with their parents, playing the loyal son, the good soldier. Maybe they toasted to family unity. Maybe they congratulated themselves for bringing me back in line. But what they didn't understand was that obedience had a lifespan. Mine had expired. The silence they'd relied on all my life was now their surveillance. I had their words, their patterns, their arrogance, and soon I'd have their downfall. The night wind pushed against the window, carrying the faint echo of the flagpole's chain rattling outside. It sounded almost like applause. December came dressed in frost and fake cheer, the kind of cold that made the flag outside my office snap like a warning. On base, everyone was preparing for inspection week files, aligned floors, gleaming tempers thin. I'd been logging 12-hour days cleaning up Ryan's sloppy reports, making sure our division didn't implode under scrutiny. That's when I saw it. A requisition form dated 2 weeks earlier, stamped with my authorization code. My name. My signature. Only I hadn't signed it. It was perfect, nearly indistinguishable from mine, except for the angle of one stroke, a curve too confident, too smooth. For a moment, I just stared at it, my pulse ticking louder than the clock on the wall. The line item authorized a high-value equipment transfer communications units that had supposedly been shipped to a base in Texas. Except I'd checked the manifests. Nothing had left Fort Bragg. Those units were still in our inventory, unaccounted for, but not missing, hidden in plain sight. It wasn't just sloppy paperwork anymore. It was fraud. I walked down the hall to Ryan's office. He was alone, sleeves rolled up, reading over a draft speech for the inspection committee. "Problem major?" he asked without looking up. "You forged my signature?" I said. His eyes flicked up slowly, unreadable. "That's a strong accusation." "Not an accusation," I said, dropping the report on his desk. "A fact." He skimmed it, leaning back in his chair. "You're overreacting. It was a timing issue. You were out that day, and the authorization couldn't wait. So you signed my name. We share a chain of command. It's semantics. It's forgery." He smirked. "It's efficiency." I stepped closer. "You've crossed a line." "No," he said softly. "I'm just following Dad's advice. Sometimes procedure needs initiative. This isn't initiative, Ryan. It's criminal." He laughed under his breath. "Don't be dramatic. You think command cares who scribbles the name as long as the job gets done. You really don't get how this world works, do you? I understand it better than you," I said. "That's why I'm still standing, for now." He slid the paper back toward me. "You should relax, Dana. You're starting to sound paranoid." I took the file and left before I said something that couldn't be unsaid. Back in my office, I locked the door and exhaled slowly. The room felt smaller, colder. My reflection in the window looked like someone I didn't recognize. Tight shoulders, clenched jaw, eyes that no longer trusted the world they served. I pulled out the smaller notebook and wrote, "Forgery confirmed. Motive cover transfer discrepancy. Suspect Captain Ryan Whitlock." Underneath, another note, "Pattern escalating. He's not afraid anymore. Someone's protecting him." That night, I stayed late to audit every report from the last quarter. It was all there, hidden in the details, dozens of small alterations, signature swaps, and timestamp manipulations that only made sense if someone believed they'd never be questioned. One file had my digital authorization, but the access log showed Ryan's credentials used seconds before mine. That wasn't coincidence, it was orchestration. As the pieces connected, something colder crept in. This wasn't just his arrogance, it was strategy. Around midnight, Morales appeared at my door, rubbing his eyes. "You still here?" he asked. "I found something," I said quietly. I showed him the report. He read it, frowning. "That's your signature, except it's not." He looked up sharply. "You're saying he's framing you. I'm saying he's preparing to." Morales leaned against the desk, shaking his head. "Ma'am, that's serious. You should go to the Inspector General now." "Not yet. I need to be certain." "Certain? This is enough." "No," I said. "If I go in now, it looks personal. I need him to reveal it himself." "And what if he does?" Morales asked. "Then he learns the one thing Dad never taught him, how it feels when the truth fights back." The next morning, the inspection committee arrived, a trio of officers from D.C., crisp uniforms and sharper eyes. Ryan turned on his best charm, shaking hands, cracking jokes about tight deadlines and tighter teams. I stood at his side, expression neutral. During the briefing, one of the officers flipped through the transfer logs. "Impressive efficiency," he said. "Captain Whitlock, you've streamlined approvals nicely." Ryan smiled. Couldn't have done it without Major Whitlock. I felt every eye shift toward me. He said it like a compliment, but it landed like a knife. After the meeting, he stopped by my office. "You should thank me," he said lightly. "Your name just got vouched for by half of D.C. "My name or your forgery?" I asked. His grin froze. "Careful," he said. "You sound ungrateful." "I'm just keeping track of what's mine." He leaned in slightly. Then maybe keep it quiet unless you're ready to lose more than your temper." When he left, I sat staring at the door until the sound of his footsteps disappeared. Then I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the forged document, another of the system logs, another of the timestamp. I backed them up to a cloud drive under a different alias. If he wanted a game of control, I was done playing defense. That night, I drove off base out to the river road where cell reception cut in and out. The water was black glass under the moon. I parked, opened my notebook, and read the lines I'd written weeks earlier. "Silence is participation." I added a new one beneath it. "He's not just covering mistakes. He's setting the stage." For what I didn't know yet, but every instinct I'd honed in war was now whispering the same warning. This wasn't about logistics. It was about elimination. The night they called it family dinner, I knew it wasn't about family. The invitation came from my mother in her usual tone, sweet, deliberate, poisoned with civility. "Just a simple meal, Dana. We can talk things through." Talk had never been her goal. Control was. Still, I went. I needed to see them, all of them, in one room before the walls started closing in. The restaurant was one of those places my father loved: polished wood military photos on the walls, waiters who recognized his face. Ryan was already there when I arrived, leaning back in his chair, laughing with a couple of officers from base. My parents sat opposite him, both smiling, as if this were any other proud family gathering. I took the last seat my uniform, crisp, my expression unreadable. "You look tense," my mother said, pouring wine. "I'm fine," I replied. "You always say that when you're not." My father cleared his throat. "Let's not start this way. We're here to discuss solutions. Solutions to what I asked. To the tension you've been causing," he said, his voice even but edged. "Ryan tells me you've been difficult." "That's one word for catching someone forging documents," I said. The table went silent. Ryan's grin didn't falter, but his knuckles tightened around his glass. "You're imagining things," he said lightly. "Maybe you're tired. You signed my name," I said. "On a federal report. I expedited your process," he countered. "You're welcome." "That's not how it works," I said. "It's illegal." My father leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Enough. You two are turning this into a spectacle. Whatever misunderstanding there is, we'll resolve it internally." "Internally," I repeated. "That's what you said when he took credit in Afghanistan, when he rerouted shipments, when he insulted me in front of staff. Internal resolution means silence. It means family loyalty," he snapped. "You're not a whistleblower. You're a Whitlock." The waiter arrived with bread, the timing almost cruel. Ryan smiled up at him, voice smooth. "Could we get another bottle? My sister's a little wound up." When the waiter left, he dropped the pretense. "You know what your problem is, Dana. You can't stand that. I'm better at playing the game. If you're calling deceit a game." I said, "Then congratulations, you're winning." "You always loved playing victim," he shot back. "You think people admire you for your morals, but really they just pity you." My mother reached across the table, tone soft but sharp beneath it. "He's trying to help you. Don't twist it into something ugly." "It's already ugly," I said. "You just don't like mirrors." My father's hand slammed the table, the sound slicing through the restaurant noise. "That's enough. This behavior is beneath you." I met his eyes. "No, it's beneath you. I've spent my whole life defending your image, cleaning your messes, pretending obedience was respect. You built this family on silence. You taught us to lie just to keep peace." "Well, peace is overrated." The table was still. Even Ryan stopped smiling. Then, like every coward faced with truth, he reached for anger instead of guilt. "You want to talk about lies," he said, standing up. "You forged things too. Remember that report in Kabul. You let me take the heat for a failed supply chain. You think command doesn't know?" His voice rose loud enough for nearby tables to notice. My father hissed, "Sit down!" Ryan ignored him, his temper finally showing cracks. "You've been undermining me since day one. You think those files you're hiding make you smart? They make you desperate." I stood slowly. "You have no idea what those files contain." "Then enlighten me," he said, grabbing a folder from his briefcase. My name was printed across the top. He threw it onto the table papers, spilling like white shrapnel. "Inspection summaries," he said. "All signed by you. You think command won't believe I was cleaning your mess?" I reached for the top page. That's when he shoved the folder hard toward me, glass tipping shattering across the table. The stem of his wine glass snapped the edge, cutting across my hand. The sound, the crystal breaking the gasp from my mother, the whisper of silverware froze the room. I looked down. A thin red line traced across my palm, a bead of blood sliding over my wrist and onto the tablecloth. For a heartbeat, no one moved. My father was first to speak. "Ryan," he barked enough. "She asked for it," Ryan said, voice shaking. "You saw how she provoked me." "Provoked?" I said quietly, pressing a napkin to my hand. "You're not a soldier anymore, Ryan. You're just a boy with a temper in uniform. Don't you dare!" he started, but my father stood between us. "Both of you sit down." His voice was low but quivering. My mother whispered, "Dana, you're bleeding." "I know," I said, "and it's the first honest thing that's happened at this table." I stood, grabbed my coat, and turned to leave. My father caught my arm. "Don't walk out on this family." "I'm not walking out," I said, meeting his eyes. "I'm walking away." I pulled free, leaving a faint smear of red on his cuff. The air outside hit cold and clean, burning through the noise still echoing in my head. The restaurant door closed behind me, sealing their world of performance inside. Under the parking lot light, I opened my notebook with my uninjured hand. My handwriting was shaky, but clear. Physical escalation confirmed. Evidence public. Witnesses multiple. Then beneath it, the blood was mine. The mistake was his. I wrapped my hand tighter in the napkin and looked up at the sky. Somewhere far off, a flag flapped against the wind, steady and unbending. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I was ready. The next morning began with the kind of stillness that only comes before a storm. The inspection results were due within 48 hours, and every office on base buzzed with the strained politeness of people pretending everything was fine. I'd barely slept. My hand, still healing from the cut Ryan caused, throbbed beneath the bandage as I typed up the last set of equipment verifications. At 0830, Sergeant Morales appeared in my doorway, eyes darting to make sure no one was around. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I looked up. Now, he said, closing the door behind him. "They're setting you up." My fingers froze over the keyboard. "Define they." "Ryan and his old man," he said. "Word around admin is they've been talking to command. There's a rumor that a falsified audit trail's been traced to your credentials." I felt the air shift thin and sharp. "You're saying they're pinning the fraud on me." That's the word Morales said grimly. "And if it goes official, you'll be relieved of duty before you can blink." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the ventilation system. "How do you know this?" I asked, because one of the junior clerks accidentally printed a memo marked for JAG review. "I saw your name. I didn't show it to anyone." "You could lose your job for that." "So could you," he said. "But the difference is you're innocent, and they're not." I sat back, forcing my pulse to steady. If they've already moved to legal review, it means the paperwork's ready. Morales nodded. "And it means the orders are coming from someone high up. Probably your father. He doesn't make official moves without insulation," I muttered. "He'd never leave fingerprints." Morales hesitated. "You have copies, right?" "Of the forged stuff? Everything I said." "Locked, dated, archived." He exhaled. "Good. Because once this drops, you'll need proof before they drag you out in cuffs." The thought sent a cold current through me, but the fear didn't root, it hardened. "Then we won't wait for them to drag me anywhere," I said. "We'll go first." Morales frowned. "Go where the Inspector General's office, but not yet. We need timing witnesses' precision. They've spent years building their illusion of control. I'm going to take it apart in one night." He studied me for a long moment. "You've been planning this, haven't you?" I smiled faintly. "Since the convoy in Wardak." We spent the next hour in whispers reviewing what I'd gathered: the falsified requisitions, the altered timestamps, the forged digital signatures. Morales helped me organize them chronologically, cross-referencing dates and signatures with known troop movements. The pattern was unmistakable. Each manipulation had one goal: reroute funds and inventory through shadow contracts linked to my father's private consultancy. Ryan was the executor. I was the fall guy. By the time Morales left, the office felt like a bunker. I stared at the clock, 09:45. 2 hours until command briefing. My mother called right on cue as if she'd been watching the clock too. "Your father says you're being investigated," she began, skipping any pretense of greeting. "He's worried sick." "Worried about me or his reputation." "Don't talk like that," she said sharply. "This is serious, Dana. They have documents with your name on them." "Forged ones," I said. "By your son. That's a dangerous accusation. So is framing a major." Silence. Then quietly, "You can fix this. All you have to do is take responsibility. Let Ryan handle the press. It will blow over." "You want me to confess to something I didn't do?" "To protect the family," she said. "You're stronger. You can handle the criticism." "He can't." I almost laughed. "He can't or he won't." "He's your brother," she said softly. "So what am I?" I asked. "The decoy." She didn't answer. "Mom," I said, "I'm done being the Whitlock family's damage control." I ended the call before she could try another plea. At 1100, Ryan appeared at my office door, all false charm. "You missed the meeting," he said. "I sent the final report up." "Final," I asked. "You weren't cleared for submission." "Command wanted efficiency," he said, smiling. "They'll appreciate initiative." "Or they'll investigate fraud," I said. "You're spiraling," he replied. "Everyone knows stress gets to women at your rank. Don't make it worse for yourself." The words were calm, practiced, designed to pierce where it hurt most. I didn't flinch. "You should start preparing your uniform," I said. "For the hearing." His brow twitched. "What hearing? The one that starts when I hand the IG, your entire operation." For a split second his mask cracked, then the smirk returned. "You won't do it," he said. "You're too careful." "No," I said softly. "I'm too thorough." He left without replying. As the door closed, I exhaled slowly, my hands trembling not from fear, but from focus. Morales's words echoed, "They're setting you up." Maybe. But they'd forgotten one thing about me I'd spent my life learning from their tactics. I knew how to survive under command that pretended to love discipline while practicing deceit. That evening, I walked the hall outside headquarters. The fluorescent lights hummed above the scent of coffee and old carpet thick in the air. Officers passed by, nodding politely, unaware that history was shifting right under their boots. Near the end of the corridor, Morales caught my eye from a doorway. He didn't speak, just mouthed 2 words. "Be ready." I nodded. As I stepped out into the cold, the flag over the base flapped hard against the winter wind, the sound sharp as warning. My phone buzzed a new email. "Sender Command Review Board. Subject Preliminary Inquiry, Major D. Whitlock." I read it once, then smiled, a quiet, dangerous kind of calm settling in. If this was their opening move, they had no idea what my endgame looked like. I opened my notebook under the yellow parking lot light and wrote the next heading, Phase 2 Countermeasure Initiated. Then, beneath it, one line that steadied my pulse. "If they want a war built on silence, I'll make sure every whisper turns into a record." I drove through the fog at dawn, the kind that clung low and heavy over the pines along Bragg Boulevard, the kind soldiers called ghost weather. My orders were simple. Meet Captain Michael Andrews from the Inspector General's office at 0700. In reality, nothing about it was simple. The IG didn't entertain whispers they dealt in proof timelines hard evidence. Lucky for me, I had all 3. When I arrived, Andrews was already waiting outside the administrative annex, tall, composed coffee in hand. Major Whitlock, he greeted. "Appreciate your discretion." His tone was neutral, but his eyes were sharp, scanning for tells. "Discretion is survival," I said. "Let's walk." We didn't go to his office. Instead, we circled the back lot where conversation vanished into the hum of distant engines. "You said you had something he began." "Forgery, asset misappropriation, command interference," I replied. "Names, Captain Ryan Whitlock. And our father, General Richard Whitlock, retired." He stopped walking. "You're accusing a sitting officer and a retired general of coordinated fraud." "I'm not accusing," I said evenly. "I'm proving." I handed him a sealed envelope. Inside were copies, digital records, signed orders, timestamp logs. He flipped through them quickly, professional, but increasingly wary. You realize if these are falsified, this conversation ends with you under investigation. They're not, I said. You can verify every file against the base server. The forgeries are his, not mine. Why come to us now? He asked. Why not sooner? Because I wanted to see how far they'd go. Now I know. Andrews nodded slowly. You've got courage, Major. Or a death wish. They're the same thing in my family. Back inside, he led me to a small room, bare walls, 1 table, 2 chairs. He set up a recorder. For protocol, he said, state your name and rank. Major Dana Whitlock, Logistics Officer, Fort Bragg. Proceed. I laid out the sequence, starting with the first forged requisition, the diverted shipments, the dummy accounts. He asked sharp, specific questions, the kind meant to break inconsistencies. I had none. You documented everything he said when I finished. 10 years of command habits, I replied. Paperwork never lies. People do. He leaned back, studying me. We'll need originals, and we'll need them quietly. You'll have them tonight. No one else can know, he warned. Not command, not legal, not even the MPs. They already know, I said. They just don't know I know. That afternoon I worked as usual briefings, logistics audits, performance reports, routine as camouflage. I copied files from the secured network to encrypted drives cross-referencing every altered signature against Ryan's access ID. Each file carried the same pattern authorization from my name timestamp within 5 seconds of his login. You couldn't fake that, not without inside access. By the end of the day, my fingers ached from typing, my eyes burned from scanning code lines. Still, I felt something close to peace. The kind that comes when you realize fear has run out of power. Morales stopped by my office as the sun went down. You doing it tonight? He asked quietly. Yes, I said. IG needs originals by 2200. You sure you trust them? I don't trust anyone, I said. That's why I'm bringing copies too. He hesitated at the door. They're watching you, ma'am. Ryan's been in and out of admin all day talking to the legal clerk. Let him talk, I said. By the time he finishes, I'll have his confession written in data. Morales gave a half smile. I almost feel sorry for him. Don't I said. He's never felt sorry for anyone else. At 21:30, I drove to the annex, again headlights off, until I reached the service road behind the building. Andrews was there waiting near a loading dock. No uniform this time, just a field jacket and gloves. You have them, he asked. I handed him a flash drive and a thin binder, encrypted, labeled chronological. I added a summary of correlation patterns between the false authorizations and the private contractor transfers. You're thorough, he said, sounding almost impressed. I had to be, I said. My father built his career on erasing evidence. I learned how to keep it alive. He slipped the binder into a sealed pouch. We'll verify by morning. If this checks out, an internal audit becomes a formal inquiry. And when that happens, you stay quiet. Let us do the talking. I've been quiet my whole life, I said. That ends soon. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Understood. As he turned to leave, I called after him. Captain. He stopped. If they find out you're helping me, then I'll deny it, he said simply. And you'll deny me. That's how survival works. And justice, I asked. He gave a small, tired smile. Justice doesn't survive in the open. It hides in paperwork until someone brave enough pulls it out. Then he was gone. I sat in my car for a long time after watching the steam rise from my breath on the windshield. The flash drive's twin copy rested in my pocket like a weapon that didn't kill but could destroy. I thought of my mother's voice telling me to stay silent, of my father's lectures about loyalty, of Ryan's smirk across the conference table. They believed silence kept me weak. They never understood it was how I gathered strength. I turned the engine back on, headlights slicing through the fog. Tomorrow, the investigation would start. Ryan would panic. My father would call in favors. My mother would pretend shock. But by then, it would be too late. As I drove past the gates, I saw the flag still up, despite the hour light catching on its edges, rippling hard against the wind. It wasn't surrender. It was signal. I whispered into the night, Phase 3 exposure. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for permission to fight back. The investigation began quietly, but my plan didn't. I wasn't waiting for bureaucracy to crawl its way toward justice. I'd learned long ago that truth only matters when it's witnessed. So I decided to create the perfect audience. The next day, I sent 3 invitations, handwritten, deliberate, impossible to misinterpret. One to my father, one to my mother, and one to Ryan. The envelopes were identical, sealed in deep navy wax with the family crest they all worshipped. The note inside read, "Dinner for Unity. Friday, 1900 hours. Officers' Hall. Fort Bragg. Dress formal. Attendance required." It wasn't phrased as a request. It was an order. For 3 days, the base carried an odd electricity. Rumors of internal audits leaked through the ranks, whispers that the Whitlocks untouchable revered were suddenly under scrutiny. I walked through the hallways, calm, composed, nodding at the same people who'd once looked through me. They didn't know the storm was scheduled for Friday. Thursday evening, my mother called. "Dinner for Unity," she asked. Her tone was amused, cautious. "That's dramatic even for you." "It's long overdue," I said. "You could have invited us home." "Fort Bragg is home," I replied. "At least for the truth." She hesitated. "Your father will attend, but he's not happy. He never is, unless he's controlling the script. And Ryan. He'll be there," she said. "He wants to clear the air." I smiled at that. "Good. I want him to speak." She missed the edge in my voice. "Dana," she said softly. "Whatever this is, please don't humiliate your brother. He's under a lot of pressure." "Then maybe pressure will teach him integrity." "You sound vindictive. You sound afraid," I said and hung up. That night, I sat at my desk reviewing the plan. Every step was measured, the invitations timed to make them curious but not alarmed, the location chosen for symbolism. The officers' hall, where my father once delivered his retirement speech, where Ryan celebrated his first promotion, and where I had sat silently in the back both times. Now, the same hall would hold their reckoning. Captain Andrews had confirmed that the investigation had advanced. An interim report would be reviewed that same night, and his team would drop by unannounced. It wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. Morales arrived at my quarters just after sunset. "You sure about this?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "This isn't a private talk anymore, ma'am. Once you do this, there's no walking it back." "That's the point," I said. "They've spent years writing my story for me. I'm taking the pen back. You want me there?" "Yes," I said, quietly. "Sit near the back. If things turn volatile, you record." "Understood," he said. Then, after a pause, "You know what people will say. That it's revenge. Then they'll be half right," I said. "The other half is justice." Friday came with that sharp winter clarity that makes even steel gleam. I dressed in full uniform, medals rank every thread pressed to perfection. My reflection in the mirror looked unshakable, though my pulse betrayed me. I slipped the flash drive with the evidence into a small silver case and slid it into my pocket. Outside, the evening sky burned with faint orange light as the sun sank behind the barracks. It was almost poetic, one day ending another waiting to begin. By 1850, the officers' hall glowed with soft lighting and polished glassware. The long dining table was set with precision white linen against oak, a single candle flickering at each place setting. I'd chosen the arrangement carefully, father at the head, mother beside him, Ryan across from me. Unity by design, exposure by proximity. They arrived right on time. My father first in a pressed gray suit, posture military straight. "You've gone to a lot of trouble," he said, scanning the room. "Trouble's what happens when people ignore warnings," I replied. My mother followed, wrapped in silk and tension. "This feels formal," she murmured. "It's a formal occasion," I said. "We're ending a war." She frowned. "What war? The one you pretend doesn't exist?" Ryan came last, dressed in his uniform, like armor grin, sharp as ever. "Dinner for Unity," he said. "Cute title." "Is this about the audit?" "It's about the truth," I said. "Same thing, isn't it? Not when the truth has witnesses." He laughed softly, taking his seat. "You're serious. You actually think anyone will believe you over us?" "They won't have to believe me," I said. "They'll see." We ate in near silence for the first 15 minutes. My mother tried to fill it with small talk, how beautiful the hall looked, how good the roast was. My father offered thin smiles. Ryan watched me, tapping his fork lightly against his plate. When the clock on the wall struck 19:30, I stood. Before dessert, I'd like to show you something I said. My father raised an eyebrow. This isn't the time. It's exactly the time I said taking the flash drive from my pocket. You always told me to be thorough. I took your advice. The room went still. Ryan's eyes narrowed. What's that? Proof, I said. Of everything. You're bluffing, he said, his voice rising slightly. My father stood slowly. Dana, sit down. No, I said. You've all fed on silence long enough. Tonight, silence ends. Before he could answer, the doors at the back opened. Captain Andrews entered, flanked by two uniformed investigators. Their presence filled the hall like gravity. Ryan's smirk vanished. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father's color drained. Andrews nodded at me, calm and deliberate. Major Whitlock, he said. We're ready when you are. I met my family's stunned eyes and smiled slightly. Dinner is served. The officers' hall gleamed like a monument to discipline. That night-polished floors, brass fixtures, and a hush so deliberate it almost felt rehearsed. I'd arrived early, inspecting every detail. The silverware aligned the wine glasses spotless, the seating chart precise. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a tribunal disguised as civility. I'd chosen a long oak table, one that forced proximity, the kind that made avoidance impossible. Candles flickered low, casting just enough light to turn every reflection into something sharper. By 1900, the doors opened. My father entered first, shoulder-squared authority in every step. Even retired, he moved like a man who still thought the army saluted his presence. Formal as expected, he set his eyes scanning the room like he owned it. You always did have a flair for theater. I learned from the best, I replied evenly. My mother followed her perfume, preceding her, like diplomacy, her smile soft but weighted. Darling, this looks lovely, she said. Almost like the old receptions. Except tonight, there's no audience, I said. We're the show. Ryan walked in last late by design, his uniform crisp metals catching the light. He was the image of composure, of rank, wrapped in arrogance. Quite the setup, he said, sliding into his chair. You planning to lecture us or feed us? Depends on how honest you plan to be, I answered. He smirked. I'll follow your lead, Major. The emphasis on rank wasn't respect, it was mockery. The waiter served the first-course salmon with roasted vegetables, a dish my mother loved. Small talk followed brittle and polite. She commented on the decor, the menu, even the weather. Father sipped his scotch, silent but watchful. Ryan leaned back in his chair, posture-loose grin practiced. So, he said, finally, this unity dinner. What exactly are we uniting over? Your newfound crusade against the family name. I met his gaze. Against corruption, I said. Big difference. You really want to air this nonsense here. Father said, his tone clipped. I want it where it belongs, I replied. In the light. He chuckled without humor. You think light fixes anything? It just exposes what people already chose to ignore. Then maybe it's time they stop ignoring. You've always had this obsession with control, he said. You mistake righteousness for strength, and you mistake manipulation for leadership. The waiter poured more wine, the tension thick enough to taste. Ryan tapped his glass, lightly grinning. Let's keep this civil. Dad, why don't you make the toast? You're good at speeches. My father nodded, slowly rising. His voice carried the same commanding resonance that used to silence entire rooms. A toast, then, he said, lifting his glass. To family, our legacy, our endurance, and our unity through difficult times. We may disagree, but we remain one bloodline, one purpose. His eyes locked on mine. That's what separates us from the rest. Loyalty above all. The words landed heavy, practiced a sermon wrapped in superiority. My mother dabbed the corner of her eye as if the moment were sacred. Ryan raised his glass too. To family, he echoed. The crystal clinked in perfect harmony, and I lifted mine last, but I didn't drink. I watched the amber liquid tremble in my glass like truth on the verge of spilling. When my father sat down, he looked satisfied. There, he said. A reminder that this family doesn't fracture under pressure. Pressure reveals cracks, I said. It doesn't hide them. You always did love drama, Ryan said, half laughing. What's next? A slideshow of my supposed crimes, if that's what it takes, I said. You sound unwell, my mother said gently, her pity thin as ice. Let's not ruin the evening. I turned to her. It was ruined long before tonight. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. Father's tone hardened. You're out of line, Major. So is forgery, I said. The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was recognition. Ryan froze for half a second, then smiled again. You've been busy, he said, digging through files chasing ghosts. You should be careful. Obsession's not good for the career. Neither is fraud. Enough, Father snapped. Whatever disagreements you two have, they stay out of public view. Do you understand me? I met his eyes. They stopped being private the moment you tried to make me a scapegoat. He laughed once, a low, cold sound. You're accusing your own blood. Do you have any idea what that makes you free? I said. Ryan leaned forward, tone casual, but eyes sharp. You really think anyone's going to believe you over me, over us? You've got notes and nerves. We've got influence. And I've got evidence. That word hung in the air like a command. My father's jaw flexed. My mother's hand tightened around her glass. Ryan smirked, but the edges of his composure cracked. You think the Army cares about your moral crusade? No, I said. But they care about signatures, timestamps, and public embarrassment. He leaned back, pretending to relax, but his eyes betrayed the flicker of calculation, the same one I'd seen years ago before every reckless move he made. You won't win, he said. You're alone. Not tonight, I said softly. Right then, the door at the back of the hall opened. A shadow moved in the doorway. Captain Andrews stepping inside with two investigators, silent, precise, unseen by my family at first. I didn't look at him directly, just straightened my posture. The final act had begun. I lifted my glass at last and said, To family may the truth finally make us one. The candles burned lower, their wax bleeding quietly down crystal stems as the air inside the officers' hall thickened. It was nearing 8, the hour I'd planned for the moment. Precision met consequence. My father was mid-sentence, lecturing on leadership as if the word still belonged to him. Ryan leaned back, nodding, sipping his wine like this was still a game he controlled. My mother watched me from across the table, her eyes darting between us like a negotiator who sensed the ceasefire ending. When my father finally paused to breathe, I stood. Before we continue, I said, There's one more toast to make. Ryan grinned, lifting his glass lazily. Now we're talking. What's this one for Family Loyalty Betrayal Command, I said, and what it means to earn it. His grin faltered slightly. You sound rehearsed. You'll want to remember this part, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Authority real, authority never shouts. It cuts. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a single folder on the table. The sound it made was small but final. These, I said evenly, are the audit reports you altered, the ones you signed in my name. My father's jaw clenched. Dana! Let her finish. My mother whispered, her voice trembling. You don't know what she's doing, he snapped. Oh, I do, I said. I've known since Afghanistan. Since you both taught me that silence keeps the peace while someone else writes the story. I turned to Ryan. You've been forging documents rerouting military contracts into Dad's private accounts. And when the audit team started asking questions, you used my credentials as the firewall. His laugh came too quickly. You can't prove any of that. You're right, I said. I can't. But Captain Andrews can. The doors at the back opened. Andrews entered quietly, clipboard in hand, flanked by two uniformed investigators. The air shifted as recognition spread across the table. My father rose instantly, composure cracking. Captain, this is a family matter. You're out of line. Andrews' tone was calm, but surgical. With respect, sir, financial misconduct under federal contract is not a family matter. It's an institutional one. Ryan stood now, voice tight. You can't just barge in here. You need authorization. We have it, Andrews said, sliding a document across the table. My father snatched it, eyes scanning. This is a preliminary inquiry, not a conviction. Then you'll have no objection to transparency, I said. Since you value loyalty so much. He glared at me, voice low. You're destroying your own bloodline. No, I said quietly. I'm cleansing it. Andrews opened his folder. The evidence submitted by Major Whitlock includes timestamp logs, duplicate authorizations, and financial trail links between base contracts and Whitlock Holdings. We've confirmed internal forgeries, dozens of them all bearing Major Whitlock's name, except of course for the access records which trace directly to Captain Whitlock. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the faint hiss of the candle wick. Ryan's face drained colorless under the soft gold light. You planted that, he said hoarsely. You set me up. No, I said. I watched you set yourself up. I just kept the receipts. My mother whispered, Dana, please, stop this. Stop what I asked. Telling the truth. For once, my father slammed his hand against the table, the echo ricocheting off the walls. You think this makes you righteous? You've humiliated your family, your name, this institution. I looked at him steady, calm. You've confused humiliation with accountability. They look the same when you're guilty. Ryan reached across the table, suddenly grabbing the folder papers, scattering like white ash. You don't get to do this to me, he shouted. I've earned this command. You've been jealous since day one. Jealous, I said softly. No, Ryan. Just done pretending you're capable. You'll regret this, he hissed. No, I said, straightening. You'll transfer command tonight. The words hung in the air like a detonator. My father's head snapped toward me. What did you say? Effective immediately, I continued. Captain Ryan Whitlock relinquishes command of the Logistics Division pending investigation. Signed by Major Dana Whitlock with the Inspector General as witness. Andrews placed a pen on the table. The paperwork's ready. Ryan stared at it, his hand trembling. You can't take my career. You already did, I said, when you turned it into a crime scene. This isn't over, he spat. It is, I said, for you. My father turned to Andrews, desperate now. You're making a mistake. My son's reputation is irrelevant, Andrews interrupted. The data speaks louder than lineage. My mother was crying silently, her tears landing on the white linen. Dana, please don't do this to him. I'm not doing anything to him, I said. I'm finally refusing to cover for him. Ryan stared at me, eyes glassy with rage. You always thought you were better than us. No, I said softly. I just never stopped trying to be good. He didn't sign at first, his jaw clenched, his breath ragged. But the pen didn't wait, neither did the truth. He scrawled his name, the ink dragging across the page. Satisfied, he muttered. Not yet, I said, but getting there. Andrews nodded to the investigators. Captain Whitlock, you're officially relieved of duty pending formal review. Ryan laughed once a hollow, broken sound. You think this ends here, Dad'll fix it. My father opened his mouth to speak, but Andrews cut him off. With respect, sir, this inquiry extends beyond the family. The Pentagon's already been notified. The look on my father's face was the first I'd ever seen of genuine fear. I stood still, watching them crumble beneath the weight of their own arrogance. You taught me to obey, I said quietly. You forgot to teach me what to do when obedience becomes complicity. Then I turned toward the door. Behind me, I heard my mother whisper, Dana, please. I paused, hand on the handle. Dinner's over, I said. It happened in seconds, the way explosions do not with warning, but with recognition. I'd barely taken a step toward the door when Ryan's chair scraped hard against the marble floor, the sound sharp enough to stop every breath in the room. You think this is justice? He shouted, voice raw, trembling somewhere between fury and fear. You humiliated me in front of command. You turned our name into a scandal. I turned back slowly. His face was flushed, his pupils small, his hand trembling against the edge of the table. No, I said evenly. You did that yourself. The words landed like glass. He lunged. It wasn't graceful, wasn't tactical, just desperate. His hand slammed into the table, scattering silverware and papers, candles toppling in flickers of gold. My father shouted his name. My mother gasped, but Ryan's fist caught the edge of the folder, sending it spinning through the air before it crashed to the floor. He reached for me across the table, knocking over a wine glass. It shattered on impact. I stepped back, my heel sliding on spilled liquid as his momentum carried him forward. His shoulder hit mine hard, the contact burning through my uniform. For a moment, we struggled his weight, my balance, the gravity of everything between us, crashing into that one impossible second. Then it broke. His arm flailed, catching the edge of a glass centerpiece. The sound that followed was too bright, too fast a snap of crystal, then a hiss of breath. He stumbled backward, hands clutching his forearm. The glass had sliced deep. A streak of red trailed down his wrist, dripping onto the white linen, then the floor. One drop, then another, until the silence filled with it. Blood hit the floor. The world seemed to contract. The smell of iron cut through perfume and wine. My mother screamed his name. My father froze, his authority fractured, staring at the mess he could no longer command. Ryan sank to one knee, pale, trembling shock chasing rage across his face. "Don't touch me," he hissed when I stepped forward. "You wanted this." "No," I said quietly. "I warned you." The investigators moved quickly, Andrews directing them with calm precision. "Get medical," he ordered, then looked at me. "Major, step back." I did, hands steady at my sides, though my pulse hammered in my throat. The floor beneath us looked like a battlefield document soaked in red crystal shards glittering like shrapnel under the chandeliers. My father snapped out of his stupor. "You'll fix this," he barked at Andrews. "This is an accident, nothing more," Sir Andrews said evenly. "It's evidence. And this room is now a secured scene. You overstep your rank," my father growled. "And you overstep the law," Andrews replied, unmoved. He turned to me. "Major Whitlock, did you strike him?" "No," I said firmly. "He slipped after attacking me." My voice was calm, clinical, like the hundreds of reports I'd filed over the years. "The injuries are self-inflicted through negligence." "We'll verify," he said, nodding to one of the agents taking photos of the shattered glass and blood pattern. My mother fell to her knees beside Ryan, her silk sleeves stained dark. "Look what you've done," she cried, her voice cracking. "You've torn us apart." I looked at her and felt nothing but the faint echo of exhaustion. "We were never whole," I said. Paramedics arrived within minutes. The hall transformed from ceremony to chaos, boots against marble stretchers, unfolding radios crackling. Ryan's face was gray now, his breathing shallow but even. When they lifted him, his eyes found mine. "You think this makes you strong?" he whispered. "It makes you a traitor." "No," I said softly. "It makes me free." Andrews watched as they carried him out. My father followed, still barking orders no one obeyed. My mother lingered last, her hand gripping the doorway. "You've destroyed your brother," she said. "You've destroyed yourself." Maybe I said. But at least I didn't destroy the truth. She stared at me for a long moment before leaving her heels echoing like punctuation. When the room emptied, Andrews approached. "You all right?" he asked. "Physically, yes," I said. "Professionally." He sighed. "There'll be fallout. The press will know within a day. But your evidence is solid, your conduct clean. It's going to hold." "Good," I said. "Because I'm done cleaning for everyone else." He gave a small nod, glancing at the red smear on the floor. "You handled yourself better than most would." I looked down at the stains, the shards, the broken wine glass lying near my chair. "No," I said quietly. "I just finally stopped apologizing." The janitorial crew came in next, their silence heavier than the blood they mopped away. Outside the hall's glass doors, the night had turned cold and bright, the moon hanging like a medal over the base. I stood alone by the table, staring at the ghost of what had just happened. Every sound, the faint squeak of shoes, the steady rhythm of the mop, the echo of distant sirens felt distant, unreal. Then I caught my reflection in one of the unbroken glasses. Calm, cold, resolved. Andrews returned once more before leaving. "We'll need a formal statement by morning," he said. "And Captain Whitlock." "He's still my brother," I interrupted. But tonight, he became his own consequence. What about your parents? They'll do what they always do: deny, reframe, recover. But this time, the world will be watching. When the last uniform left, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The air still smelled faintly of wine and antiseptic. I bent down and picked up one of the shattered glass pieces, its edge glinting red under the chandelier. It was beautiful in a brutal way, transparent, broken honest. I placed it in a small envelope, sealed it, and wrote on the front in black ink, "Proof that silence bleeds too." As I turned out the lights, the reflection of the hall lingered behind me. Chairs, a skew table, half-cleared evidence tagged and photographed. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the obedient one, the daughter who never raised her voice. But tonight, the silence finally screamed back. The next morning, Fort Bragg was a different world. The base ran on rumors before breakfast, and by noon, the story had spread faster than any official report could catch up. Everyone had heard about the incident at the officers' hall, the shouting, the glass, the blood. Some said it was a fight between siblings, others whispered it was a full-blown corruption scandal. Only one thing was certain: the Whitlock name was no longer untouchable. I walked through the corridor with my head high, uniform, flawless posture exact. Every salute I received came slower, now cautious, curious. Respect was being recalibrated. By 900, Captain Ryan Whitlock's office was sealed. The blinds were drawn, his nameplate removed, the brass screws leaving faint impressions where his reputation used to hang. Investigators swarmed his desk collecting hard drives, files, and digital logs. I stood at the doorway as Andrews signed off the handover order. "He's been moved to Womack Army Medical," he said quietly. "Stable condition. He'll be questioned once discharged. And the audit I asked. Expanded. The Pentagon wants full disclosure by Friday. Your evidence is the backbone of it." I nodded. "Then let's make sure it holds." Outside, the North Carolina air felt colder than usual, clean but heavy. The flag over headquarters fluttered against a gray sky, the kind that turned sunlight into steel. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't open. Reporters, distant relatives, soldiers who suddenly remembered my name. When I finally reached my quarters, there were 3 envelopes waiting at my door. 1 official, 2 personal. The first was stamped with the seal of the Department of the Army notification of interim command appointment. Effective immediately, Major Dana Whitlock, Acting Division Commander Logistics Operations, Fort Bragg. I read it twice slowly. A promotion born from ruin but earned by truth. The irony wasn't lost on me. The second envelope was from my father, his handwriting sharp, deliberate. "Dana, I hope you understand the damage you've caused. Your brother's future is uncertain, your mother's heart is breaking, and my name is being dragged through mud I spent decades keeping clean. Come home before this destroys us all." I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the trash without hesitation. The third letter was unsigned, but I knew it was from my mother. The paper smelled faintly of her perfume, the ink smudged as if written through tears. "You proved your point. Please stop before we have nothing left." I traced the words with my fingertip, then set it aflame over the sink. The paper curled inward, turned to ash, and vanished. "We already have nothing," I whispered. By Wednesday, the official inquiry was public. Military Times ran the headline first: "Fort Bragg officer under federal investigation for contract fraud." It didn't mention my name, but it didn't have to. The story referenced a sibling witness misused credentials and ongoing internal review. Within hours, news outlets picked it up nationwide. My father tried damage control, giving a statement outside his private firm. The cameras caught his polished composure, his confident tone, but the cracks showed in his eyes. "My son is a decorated officer," he said. "Our family has always served this country with honor. We ask for privacy." Behind him, protesters held signs that read, "Honor isn't hereditary and justice for the silenced." The clip went viral within hours. By Thursday, Whitlock Holdings began to unravel. Contracts suspended, board members resigning, clients demanding audits. The empire my father had built on charm and control crumbled under scrutiny. A Senate subcommittee requested an ethics review. The man who'd once lectured me about discipline now had his name trending under investigation. My mother vanished from public view. Neighbors told reporters she'd left town to recover, though I knew she was simply hiding from the mirror. Meanwhile, on base, I did what I'd always done: worked. Reports, briefings, logistics chains, emergency supply reviews. The rhythm of service kept me grounded. One afternoon, Andrews appeared at my door. "The board finalized it," he said, placing a file on my desk. Inside, a single sheet: permanent promotion recommended, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army Logistics Command. I looked at it for a long time before speaking. "You're sure this isn't a pity promotion?" "No," he said firmly. "This is restitution." The ceremony was small private by my request. No speeches, no applause. Just a flag, a handshake, and a pin that gleamed against my uniform. When Andrew saluted, his expression held quiet respect. "You turned chaos into clarity," he said. "That's not common." "Neither is justice," I said. He smiled faintly. "Don't lose that edge. The system needs people who make it uncomfortable." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the barracks, I stood outside the officers' hall, the same place where it had all fallen apart. The glass had been replaced, the floors cleaned, the air fresh again. But I could still see it: the spill of red, the faces frozen in shock, the silence that changed everything. Justice wasn't clean. It never was. It just left fewer stains when you stopped looking away. My phone buzzed once more, an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. My father's voice hoarse, small. "Dana, your brother's been released. He's angry but alive. He's blaming me now." "You got what you wanted." "No," I said calmly. "I got what was fair." "You think this makes you noble? You'll regret it when the family's gone." "You destroyed the family when you built it on lies," I said. "I just stopped holding up the walls." He didn't respond. Just breathing, then a quiet click. I stood there, phone in hand, listening to the wind sweep through the parade field. The next morning, I returned to duty. My nameplate outside the office now read, Lieutenant Colonel D. Whitlock. It wasn't pride that filled me, it was peace. The kind that comes after years of holding your breath. I looked at the flag waving in the early light and thought of the words my grandmother once wrote to me before she passed: "Don't inherit their silence." I finally understood what she meant. Some legacies are meant to be broken, so truth can breathe again. 2 months later, Washington, D.C. felt colder than I remembered. The winter wind came off the Potomac like a whisper through metal, brushing across my uniform as I walked along the riverbank at dawn. The city was waking slowly, rows of memorials glowing faintly against the silver sky, joggers passing by without recognizing the woman they'd once read about in the papers. Fort Bragg scandal. The major who spoke out, a family divided by duty. The headlines had quieted now, but the echoes never really faded. My promotion had been finalized the previous week. Lieutenant Colonel Dana Whitlock, U.S. Army Logistics Command. I'd accepted the rank, the responsibility, and the solitude that came with it. There were new tasks, new reports, and an inbox that never emptied, but silence followed me everywhere. Not the kind I used to fear. This one was earned. That morning, I carried only 2 things: a folded flag and a sealed envelope. The flag was for ceremony. The envelope was for closure. Inside it, my father's handwriting, the last letter he'd ever send me. "Dana," it began. "We raised you to be strong, but never meant for that strength to turn against us. Ryan's career is gone. My firm is finished, and your mother doesn't leave her room. If there's any forgiveness left in you, let it start here. Family doesn't end in disgrace. It bends and returns to itself. Please come home." I read it once more before setting it alight with a match. The paper curled, instantly blackened edges folding inward like wounded wings. I watched the flames crawl toward the signature dad until it crumbled to ash. The wind lifted it gently from my palm, carrying it over the water. The ashes scattered, dissolving into the ripples, then vanished. The river took the last thing I owed him. Behind me, the flag rustled softly in my grip. I thought of all it had seen: war zones, parades, funerals, betrayals masked as tradition. The fabric smelled faintly of starch and history. I unfolded it halfway, running my fingers over the stars, each one representing something my family had forgotten: duty, integrity, sacrifice. For them, those were words to recite. For me, they had become choices I bled to keep. My phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Captain Andrews. The audit closed. Charges confirmed. Command commends your cooperation. Proud to have served beside you. I smiled faintly. It wasn't pride I felt, just relief. Justice doesn't erase pain. It just makes room for peace. And peace, I'd learned, was never loud. I sat on a nearby bench overlooking the water. Across the river, the Pentagon's concrete angles caught the first light of morning. Soldiers there were already starting their day meetings, drills, endless rotations. Somewhere in that rhythm, my name was still whispered, debated, maybe even doubted. I didn't mind. Truth doesn't need universal approval. It just needs witnesses. I took a small locket from my pocket inside. Was my grandmother's note worn from years of being folded and refolded. Don't let them take your light. It had survived deployments, distance, and silence. It was the only inheritance worth keeping. I held it up to the sunrise, then tucked it back into my uniform. They didn't take it, I whispered. They just taught me how to protect it. The river shimmered with gold now, and the reflection of the flag fluttered across its surface like a promise remade. I thought about Ryan under investigation, stripped of rank, facing the same system he'd once mocked. I thought about my father, his empire dismantled, his name reduced to a cautionary tale, and my mother living behind curtains pretending her silence was protection. I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't forgive them either. Some things don't require an ending. They just require distance. I stood tucking the flag neatly beneath my arm and walked toward the bridge. People passed, none of them knowing what I'd burned, what I'd buried, what I'd reclaimed. Above the water, a lone heron flew low wings, slicing through the cold air. I watched it until it disappeared into the gray horizon. Then I took a deep breath, crisp and clean, the kind that fills you from the inside out. When I reached the midpoint of the bridge, I stopped. Below, the Potomac moved slow and deliberate, carrying history and debris in the same current. I pulled one final page from my coat, a note I'd written the night before. To those still living in silence, speak. The world won't end. It'll begin. I folded it twice, then let it fall. The paper danced on the air before landing softly on the surface, carried away like everything else I was finally ready to release. A jogger paused nearby, glancing at my uniform. "You serving or retiring, ma'am?" he asked kindly. I smiled. "Still serving," I said. "Just in a different way now." He nodded respectfully before running off. I watched him disappear into the sunlight, then looked down at the river again. "Still serving," I repeated under my breath. "Still standing." As the morning traffic hummed behind me and the wind lifted the edge of my coat, I turned toward the city one last time. Washington gleamed under the rising sun, imperfect, unyielding, alive. I thought about every woman who'd been told to stay quiet for peace, every soldier who'd been told to obey without question, every daughter who'd been told family mattered more than truth. This story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who'd ever chosen to stand alone rather than kneel together. I started walking again, my boots steady against the stone path. The river flowed beside me, endless, forgiving, eternal. And for the first time in my life, the silence inside me wasn't empty, it was free. I never thought my story would be told beyond the walls of Fort Bragg. For years, I believed justice was something you earned quietly through discipline, through endurance, through silence. That was what my father taught me, what the Army reinforced, and what I carried like an invisible medal. But the truth is, silence only serves those who benefit from it. The moment you break it, you stop being the dutiful soldier of someone else's war and start becoming the commander of your own peace. That's what this story really is. It's not about bloodlines or scandals. It's about ownership of truth, of identity, of freedom. When the investigation ended and the media storm died down, I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, what I felt was distance between who I was and who I'd become. I'd spent so long living by other people's expectations that I didn't know how to exist without resistance. Every morning, I'd wake before dawn, tie my boots, and stare at my reflection in the mirror, waiting to recognize the woman in uniform. And then, slowly, I realized that maybe I didn't have to. Maybe recognition isn't about familiarity. Maybe it's about evolution. People often tell me I was brave. They say it like courage is a moment to switch that flips a singular act of defiance. But courage isn't loud. It's not cinematic. It's built in layers and decisions no one sees. It's the night you don't send the apology text. The morning you decide to show up even though no one clapped for you yesterday. It's the second you look someone powerful in the eye and refuse to flinch. That's what this took. Not one act of rebellion, but 1,000 quiet refusals to keep pretending everything was fine. My brother's downfall became national news. My father's reputation evaporated in headlines. My mother faded into the background, her silence finally too heavy to carry. But what most people missed was that I didn't do any of this out of hate. I did it because I was tired of surviving. There's a difference between living with discipline and living under obedience. The first builds you, the second buries you. The week after my promotion, I visited a small cafe just outside the Pentagon. The barista recognized my name from the news. She hesitated as she handed me my coffee and said quietly, "My father did the same thing to me. Not in the army, but in life. He made me feel small for every choice I made. Watching you stand up, it helped." She smiled shyly and walked away before I could respond. But I sat there holding that paper cup like it weighed something sacred. That's when it hit me. What happened to me wasn't personal anymore. It was universal. Every act of defiance against control is a mirror someone else needs. I started receiving letters not from journalists, not from politicians, but from soldiers, daughters, teachers, widows, sons. People who'd been silenced in different uniforms. They wrote about gaslighting, about being the invisible one in families that worship appearances, about carrying the weight of someone else's legacy until it crushed their spine. Some ended their letters with thank you. Others just ended with me too. I read every one of them, and I realized that pain isn't what breaks us, it's what connects us. You don't have to wear a uniform to know what it means to serve someone else's idea of who you should be. You don't have to be in a war zone to understand what it feels like to walk through life diffusing emotional landmines. The battlefield is everywhere at dinner tables, in offices, in the quiet rooms of homes that look perfect from the outside. But the strategy is always the same: awareness, boundaries, and exposure. Know the enemy. Protect your perimeter. Shine light on what hides in the dark. Some nights I still wake up from dreams of that hall, the sound of glass breaking, the sting of my brother's voice, the smell of blood and candle wax. But when I do, I remind myself that the sound of something breaking can also be the sound of something being freed. That's what trauma is: a rupture that lets light in. If you're reading this and you've ever been told you're too emotional, too assertive, too difficult, too much, remember this. Those are the labels people use when they fear losing control over you. Wear them like stripes. They mean you've stopped being manageable. I didn't win that night because my brother fell or because my father lost everything. I won because I didn't lose myself. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about reclamation. Revenge wants to hurt back. Justice wants to stop the cycle. I wanted both, but life only allowed one. So I chose the one that let me sleep at night. If you've made it this far into my story, maybe it's because something in you recognizes the quiet war I fought. Maybe you're still fighting yours. Maybe your version doesn't wear medals or command ranks. Maybe it looks like saying no for the first time, like walking out of a room instead of arguing, like finally speaking your truth even when your voice shakes. That's courage too. I used to think peace was the absence of noise. Now I know it's the absence of permission. You don't need anyone's blessing to start over. Not your parents, not your bosses, not your abusers, not even society's. You just need a moment of brutal honesty with yourself. This ends with me. That's where freedom begins. Not when the world changes, but when you do. When I look back now, it's not the confrontation I remember most. It's the quiet after the stillness that follows truth when it finally stops hiding. People always expect fireworks when justice arrives. They expect cinematic closure, applause, or a clean cut between right and wrong. But the truth doesn't arrive with music. It comes quietly standing beside you like an old friend you didn't realize you'd been waiting for. The weeks after my family's collapse were both heavy and freeing. For the first time, no one was telling me what to wear, what to say, or how to act. The control that once defined my life had evaporated, and the silence it left behind was both terrifying and sacred. I began running along the Potomac every morning before sunrise. The rhythm of my steps matched my heartbeat, steady, alive, free. Sometimes I'd see other soldiers training nearby, their breath visible in the cold air. They didn't know who I was, and I liked it that way. I wasn't the whistleblower or the major who exposed her family. I was just another person learning how to live again. A few months later, I was invited to speak at the U.S. Army Leadership Conference in Arlington. I almost declined. Standing in front of hundreds of officers, cadets, and policymakers was the last thing I wanted. But then I remembered the barista's words, the letters I'd received, and the quiet messages that said, "You helped me find my voice." I said yes. The auditorium was full that day, rows of uniforms, medals gleaming, cameras rolling. I didn't bring notes. I didn't need them. Leadership I began isn't about command, it's about conscience. It's easy to lead when your orders are clear and your rewards are guaranteed. The real test comes when the right thing costs you everything comfortable. The room was silent. I looked around and saw eyes fixed not on my rank, but on my truth. "The Army taught me how to fight," I said, "but life taught me what to fight for." When I finished, there was no applause at first, just stillness. Then slowly, the sound built. Not polite, not perfunctory, genuine. That sound wasn't for victory. It was for recognition. After the speech, a young cadet approached me. "Ma'am, he said my father's a colonel. I used to think speaking up was betrayal. Now I think silence is." I nodded. "Then you're already learning what most people never do," I told him. "Loyalty without truth isn't loyalty, it's fear." He smiled and saluted. And in that moment, I realized that legacies don't have to be inherited. They can be rewritten. I started volunteering with veteran support programs soon after, specifically for those who'd faced retaliation after reporting misconduct. I read their stories, heard their anger, and saw the same exhaustion I once carried. And every time I told mine, I saw their posture shift, their eyes sharpen, their breath steady. Stories don't fix people. They remind them they're not broken. One night, while reviewing a case for a young officer who'd been wrongfully demoted, I found myself writing something on a scrap of paper without thinking. "You don't owe peace to those who thrive on your silence." I taped it to my desk, and it's still there today. Because every time I start doubting whether it was worth it, whether destroying my family's illusion was too high a price, I look at that sentence and remember, illusion is never worth keeping if it requires your dignity to sustain it. Ryan wrote to me once from a rehabilitation center in Georgia. The letter was short. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, that obedience isn't loyalty. Maybe you're right. Maybe I was afraid of being nothing without Dad's approval. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do hope you find peace." I read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the same box where I'd kept my grandmother's note. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry, because sometimes silence is the only boundary left to protect. A year after the hearing, I stood at the Pentagon again, watching the flag rise at dawn. The wind caught it perfectly, unfurling it against the pale light. Every star looked sharper in the cold. I thought about the generations of soldiers who'd stood where I stood, each carrying their own battles, the visible and the invisible ones. I thought about the people who'd watched my story online, some cheering, others condemning, and how little any of that mattered now. Because in the end, justice isn't measured by applause. It's measured by the peace you feel when no one's watching. If you've listened this far, maybe you're carrying your own version of the Whitlock Doctrine. The belief that silence equals love, or that compliance equals respect. Maybe you've spent years swallowing your truth to keep the peace, convincing yourself that endurance is virtue. But here's the truth. I wish someone had told me sooner endurance without purpose is just captivity. You don't have to burn your past to build your future, but you do have to stop bowing to it. If there's one thing I learned from that night at Fort Bragg, it's that exposure isn't destruction, it's cleansing. The moment you let truth breathe, everything false begins to suffocate. Let it. Let it die. Let it fall apart. That's not failure. That's rebirth. So here's my call to you, not as an officer, not as a daughter, but as someone who finally stopped apologizing for existing too loudly. Tell your story. Write it. Speak it. Share it with one person, one stranger, one friend who needs to hear it. Because stories like mine aren't meant to end, they're meant to echo. And every time you choose truth over comfort, you extend that echo. You make it harder for silence to win. And if you're watching this, if you've felt your hands shake at a dinner table, your heart race when someone calls your courage disrespect, or your voice tremble as you finally say enough, then I need you to know something. You're not weak. You're not crazy. You're not alone. You're the next one to stand. Tell me where you're listening from. Drop your city, your time, your story below. Because this isn't just my reckoning. It's ours. And the next voice to break the silence might be yours.